Okay, so for these topics, okay, we're going to discuss about hormonal control of the human's menstrual cycle. And we do know that menstrual cycle is very important. It's a natural changes, okay, in the uterus and ovary for female reproductive system to make the pregnancy possible. So it will start with the puberty, for female, start from the puberty. So the complete menstrual cycle involves few organs here. Okay, first hypothalamus, okay, anterior pituitary glands, ovary, as well as the uterus. Okay, so these are the organs that involve in the menstrual cycle. So if you want to divide the menstrual cycle, we can divide into two phases. The first one is the follicular phase, followed by the luteal phase. Okay, so what's mean follicular phase? Follicular phase basically, okay, start from the first day of the menses until the ovulation. So basically, we want to prepare for ovulation. Means that prepare the follicle and then ovulate. Okay, luteal phase basically is after, okay, the ovulations and before the period starts. So this one basically is to prepare for possible pregnancy. Are you clear? Okay, so we have follicular phase and luteal phase. Follicular phase basically prepare for the ovulation. Luteal phase actually prepare for the pregnancy. Okay, so the length of menstrual cycle, okay, depends. Okay, normally the first day we determine it as the bleeding. Okay, the menstrual bleeding as of first day until the onset of the menses for the next cycle. So generally, the median duration is not like must be that 28 days, but it's between. Okay, so some I claim that 7 days plus minus 7 days is considered normal. Okay, so generally the medians will be around 28 days. Okay, so what are the hormones that basically involve in the entire human's menstrual cycle? So the name of hormone first is a GnRH. Gonadotropins releasing hormones, which involve, okay, or in charge by the hypothalamus, in charge by hypothalamus. And then from GnRH is the one that stimulates the release of the follicle stimulating hormone and also the luteinizing hormone. So we have these two hormones. So these two hormones actually released by the anterior pituitary glands, okay, anterior pituitary glands. So GnRH actually released by the hypothalamus, okay. So this FSH and LH will have the effect onto the ovary. Okay, onto the ovaries. So therefore, in the ovaries, then another two hormones will be involved, which are the estrogen and progesterone. So total, we have 5 hormones that we are going to learn here. Okay, 5 hormones, but our focus will be FSH, LH, estrogen, and progesterone, and we need to know their effect. Okay, so quick ones, I'll go through this diagram with all of you, and then we need to integrate it with the oogenesis as well and the growth of the follicle. Okay, now, first of all, GnRH is the one. GnRH, can you see that? So the release of the GnRH from the hypothalamus, okay, very important from hypothalamus. So the release of GnRH will be detected by anterior pituitary glands, not posterior. Posterior pituitary glands involved in the ADH. Still remember the posterior pituitary glands involved in the ADH release, but for GnRH, the receptor of the GnRH located on the anterior pituitary glands, anterior pituitary glands. So what is the response? Anterior pituitary gland respond to GnRH by releasing these two hormones, FSH and LH, follicle stimulating hormones, and also the luteinizing hormone. But the main effect here is the follicle stimulating hormone. So this thing will continue for a few days. So therefore, you can see that, okay, the blue color line here indicates, the blue color line indicates the follicle stimulating hormone. So because the few days release of the follicle stimulating hormones, you can see the FSH concentration now increase. Do you realize that? FSH. So what is the role of FSH? From the name of this, follicle stimulating hormones, basically they stimulate the growth of the follicle. So go back to our oogenesis. We do know that at the prenatal stage, okay, so the primary oocyte stop at the prophase 1. Okay, this primary oocyte stop at prophase 1. So this primary oocyte actually surrounded by a layer of the very thin flectin cells. So the entire thing now is known as the primordial follicle. So this primordial follicle actually remain inside the ovary doing nothing, okay, until the girl reach puberty. So when the girl reach the puberty already, so when this FSH release, some, okay, about 15 to 20 primordial follicle will be chosen randomly. And this primordial follicle now receive the hormones FSH. They will grow, okay, into the primary follicle, where you can see that this is it still remain as a primary oocyte, but now the cells actually, the flectin cells of the follicle cells now become cuboidal, slightly thicker now. Okay, surrounded by this layer of cells called follicle. So this one actually is now termed as primary follicle. So can you see that this is due to what? Due to the release of the FSH. So FSH stimulates this, stimulates this primordial follicle, some of them to develop into the primary follicle. So the developments of the follicle will continue, will continue to form what we call the secondary follicle and matured into what we call as a Graafian follicle or ovarian follicle, which characterized by this shape. So this is the oocyte, okay, secondary oocyte. So this one is termed as a secondary, it's an ovarian follicle. This process all involve the release of the FSH. Are you clear? FSH. So the growth of this follicle is very, very important because the cells, the follicular cells actually release another hormone known as the estrogen. Can you see that? So corresponding to the growth of the follicle, so from the primordial follicle into the primordial, grow into the primary follicle and all the way grow up to becomes the matured, okay, matured ovarian follicle. So during this process, can you see that the growth of the follicle, because the cells here produce estrogen, follicular cells or granulosa cells produce estrogen, that's why concentration of the estrogen now increase. Can you see that? Estrogen concentration increase. So with the increase of the concentration of estrogen, estrogen actually have three functions here. Three functions depends on the concentration. At low concentration of the estrogen, because there is a development of the follicle, we don't want the rest of the follicle to develop. We don't want to waste so many follicle. Then you can see that, okay, you can see that we want to stop the FSH. So low concentration of FSH actually inhibits, low concentration estrogen inhibits the FSH. So that's why you can see that the FSH concentration decrease. Can you see that? FSH initially for the first few days increase, but after that slightly decreased. Why? Because low concentration of estrogen inhibits the release of the FSH. So the reason is why we inhibit, because we don't want to have the super or what we call this multiple follicle development. We want one or few of them develops enough already. We don't want to waste them, because each month, okay, for girls, you just need to ovulate one. So it means that we do not want to have so or too many follicle or primordial follicle be stimulated and grow. Are you clear? So again, low concentration, okay, low concentration estrogen have a negative feedback onto the release of the FSH. So therefore, FSH concentration decrease. That's one. Estrogen concentration increase also corresponding to the repair of the endometrium. So estrogen actually have another function here is to repair the endometrium, because when girl had a menstruation, there is a shedding of the endometrium, okay, the first lines of the uterus. So therefore, to repair it, we need to have the estrogen. So estrogen actually stimulates the repair. Basically, means you have the repair and also make up this what we call the vascular, okay, or blood vessel, okay, at the endometrium. So can you see that the increase of the estrogen level corresponding to the increase of the thickness of the endometrium and the wall of the uterus, because we want to prepare for any pregnancy and implantation, correct or not? Okay, so and because the cells keep on growing, right, in the follicle until they become the matured follicle already, or Graafian follicle, ovarian follicle in this case. So the next stage we want to have the ovulation. So how to trigger the ovulations? You can see the estrogen. I say that low concentration of the estrogen stop the release of the, or inhibits the release of the FSH, correct or not? But when the concentration of estrogen is high, so why concentration of estrogen is high? Because we have so many growing granulosa cells, okay, the follicle cells or granulosa cells. So because of the high concentration estrogen, high concentration estrogen have positive feedbacks onto the LH. So can you see that? So therefore, you can see that there is a surge of the LH, a luteinizing hormone. So initially, you can see that quite constant release, and suddenly there is a high surge, okay, near to about day 14. Can I see that? Near to day 14. So therefore, you can see that the surge of the LH corresponding to the increase, okay, of the estrogen. Why estrogen concentration increase? Because of the follicle. Follicle already released, release sufficient estrogen and tell that, oh, now ovulation can take place. So the high concentration of estrogen trigger the release of the LH. The surge of the LH cause ovulation to take place. So the rupture of the ovarian follicle release the secondary oocyte, not ovum, guys. Okay. So what is the function of LH? Okay, the main function of how LH here is, first, it will cause the ovulation to take place. Definitely, ovulation to take place. Second, it also stimulates, okay, LH also stimulates the remaining follicle to develop into corpus luteum. Can you see that? Corpus luteum. Okay, and the third one, the LH also have the effect onto the corpus luteum, so that corpus luteum produce and secretes one of the very important hormones called progesterone, as well as the estrogen. Are you clear? So because of the rupture of the follicle, so there is a sudden decrease of the estrogen. Can you see that? Sudden decrease. But after that, pick up a little bit because of the corpus luteum. Are you clear? So do not need to have estrogen anymore because the wall, the endometrium already repaired. So what is the function of progesterone? Progesterone also has two functions here. So high concentration of progesterone, because ovulation takes place, means that there is a possibility of the pregnancy. Are you clear? There is a possibility of pregnancy. So progesterone actually inhibits the release of FSH. Very important, because at this moment, they may have any pregnancy if sexual intercourse take place. Correct or not? Okay. So it means that we do not want to waste the follicle, the primordial follicle. We don't want to waste the primary oocyte. We wait and see, right, whether fertilization take place or not. So these progesterones will continue to work with the estrogen because, okay, to inhibit the release of the FSH. Therefore, follicle cannot develop at this moment. Why? Because any possible pregnancy may take place. Any possible pregnancy may take place if sexual intercourse take place. So corpus luteum continue to release the progesterone, and progesterone will work together with estrogen. Both of them maintain the lining of the endometrium. And that's very important why we need to maintain lining, because we want to prepare for any possible pregnancy and implantation. And corpus luteum only will last for 2 weeks. So therefore, the girl won't have any menstruations, correct or not, or menses, in these 14 days because progesterone is released. So with the high concentration of progesterone inhibits the follicular development, okay, as well as maintain the lining, work together with the estrogen to maintain the lining of the endometrium. But if that, provided that there is no pregnancy, okay, no fertilizations and no implantation. But if let's say any pregnancy or fertilization take place, then what will happen here is this corpus luteum will continue because it received the hormone and receives the signal say that, okay, now fertilization take place, pregnancy take place, corpus luteum will last longer, 2 to 3 months until the placenta take over the job, okay, to produce progesterone and maintain the lining. So that is also why when girl or female is pregnant, they won't have the menstruation, correct or not? Because progesterones together with the estrogen work to maintain the lining of the endometrium. But if there is no pregnancy take place or no implantation take place, then corpus luteum, you see that's the corpus luteum will degenerate. When the degeneration of corpus luteum will be characterized by the fall of the concentration of the progesterone. So without the progesterone, what will happen? First, you can see that menstruation take place because without the progesterone, so there is no maintenance of the lining of the endometrium. Therefore, the menstruation take place. And without the progesterone and estrogen, then no inhibitor onto the release of the FSH. Now you can see that Gnrh release, FSH release, so the cycle continue. Are you clear? So this is how the menstruation, hormonal control take place during the menstruations. Okay, are you clear about this? Okay, generally you need to know about this. Okay, so let me summarize it again. Okay, so we're going to start it with the hypothalamus. Okay, now we start with hypothalamus, the integration center, the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus is then organs that start the entire, because it's a control center. So when the girl reached the puberty, so hypothalamus release one of the hormones called Gnrh. Okay, use different color for hormone. Now, Gnrh is not so important in our syllabus. So what is the function of Gnrh? Gnrh actually we're going to stimulate. Okay, so with the arrow, arrow means trigger or stimulate or activate. Okay, stimulate what? Stimulates the anterior pituitary glands, not posterior, anterior pituitary glands. So the anterior pituitary glands now release 2 hormones. So what are these 2 hormones? So these hormones, they are FSH. So at this moment, FSH is more important. So what is the role of FSH? So FSH, the targets, okay, will be targeting ovary. Okay, targets the ovary. Particularly what? Particularly targets the primordial. Okay, follicle. So what is the primordial follicle? Primordial follicle actually is the primary oocyte that stop at the primary oocyte, stop at the prophase 1, surrounded by this layer of flectin cells, okay, known as the follicular cells. So this is a primordial follicle. So what is the effect? What is the effect of these hormones? So you can see that developments of the follicle take place. So what is the development of follicle? So it means that the follicle will start to grow from the primordial follicle, becomes the primary follicle. So most the cell becomes thicker, cuboidal cells, and then continue to grow into the matured follicle. okay, or we call it as a Graafian follicle or ovarian follicle. So characterized by this shape. So where the cells will be here, okay, the secondary oocytes. Are you clear? So this one is a primordial follicle. This is a primary follicle, and this is the ovarian follicle. Are you clear? So during this process, the growth, okay, during this process, what happened here is the follicle now release another hormone known as estrogen. Okay, known as estrogen. So what is the function of estrogen? Okay, so estrogen have three functions. Okay, first functions, low concentration, inhibits the release of FSH. So why inhibits the release of FSH? Because we don't want to have more follicle to develop, because we need to stop. We don't want to waste the follicle. Okay. Second, the estrogens, increasing concentrations of the estrogen, okay, repair endometrium. Are you clear? So it means that you build back the wall of the uterus, and because the developments, okay, can you see that development? So this is a cell called granulosa cell, okay, granulosa cell. So granulosa cells are the one that produce estrogen. So this estrogen concentration become higher and higher. So with high concentration, you're going to stimulate the release of LH. So these hormones called LH. Now we need to learn. Okay, Ken, so far? You need to take notes. Okay, can I see that? So LH. So LH, I put it here, okay? I'll start with from here. So this is LH. Okay, later you can copy down. Okay, so LH. So what's the function of LH? So the main function of LH number one is to stimulate ovulation. Okay, LH stimulate ovulations. Second, okay, not only ovulation, it will stimulate the rupture follicle and to develop into the corpus luteum. Are you clear? Stimulates. Okay, the rupture follicle become corpus luteum. And number three, also stimulate corpus luteum to produce another hormone known as progesterone. Okay, known as progesterone. So what is the function of progesterone? So progesterone have two functions here. First, progesterone actually inhibit the release of FSH and LH or FSH. And second, okay, it's very important also, work with, together with the estrogen, maintain the lining. Okay, or maintain the thickness of endometrium. Okay, and this corpus luteum, we know that it depends whether you have pregnancy or not. So without fertilization and pregnancy or implantation, fertilizations and the implantation, so it will only last about 2 weeks. Then it degenerates. But with fertilization and implantation, then it can last 2 to 3 months and continue to produce progesterone, because implantation already, we do not want the shedding of the endometrium. So if let's say there's no fertilization and implantations within these 2 weeks, what will happen here is the progesterone level drop, because the corpus luteum degenerated. So when the corpus luteum degenerated, therefore you can see that, okay, the menstruation take place again. Okay, so if you need, okay, is it clear enough, or you want to take a photo, you can. Basically, this diagram summarizes the entire process of the hormonal control in menstruation. So let me highlight. Is it possible? I think it's possible for me to highlight the hormones that you need to know. Hey, this is not hormone. I mistake. Gnrh. Okay, FSH. Okay, estrogen, LH, and progesterone. Okay. So with this, I stop recording. Okay, first we studied follicular phase. Okay, follicular phase basically means that to prepare for the ovulation. Right? So the follicular phase is the phase of the menstrual cycle in humans, during which follicle in the ovary actually become matured, ending with the ovulation. So how we know follicular phase start? It always starts on the first day of the female period. So during this follicular phase, we have the GnRH, or known as gonadotrophin releasing hormone, released from the GnRH neuron within the hypothalamus. And GnRH is a releasing hormone responsible for the release of what? Follicle stimulating hormone FSH and luteinizing hormone LH, okay, from the anterior pituitary glands. Okay, so always remember. Okay, so FSH level begins to rise and peak during the first week of the follicular phase. So FSH induces the proliferations of the granulosa cells in the developing follicle, and the granulosa cells surrounding the primary oocyte respond to FSH by secreting the estrogens. Okay? Estrogen. So what are the functions of estrogen? Low concentration estrogen inhibits the further production of FSH and LH by the anterior pituitary glands, and the release of estrogen initiates the thickenings, okay, of the endometrium and develops the blood capillary and the blood vessel. Okay, so basically it means that they form a new layer, or we call the repair of the endometrium. Now, as we know that we have about 15 to 20 follicles that develop, but the one that can continue to develop will be this dominant follicle. So this dominant follicle continues to secrete estrogen. The increase in the estrogen causes the anterior pituitary glands to secrete FSH and LH, and will cause the LH surge. So LH usually happens 1 or 2 days before the ovulation, and is responsible for stimulating the rupture of the Graafian follicle or ovarian follicle, and therefore releasing the secondary oocyte. Okay, very important, secondary oocytes. Okay, so followed by after this follicular phase, followed by the luteal phase, is roughly about 14 days, which is the final phase of the menstrual cycle. So begin with the formation of the corpus luteum. Okay? So who's caused the corpus luteum to be formed against the the LH? Okay, LH actually stimulates the formations of the corpus luteum, and LH also is the one that caused the the release or the production of progesterone by this corpus luteum. So the corpus luteum and ideal because of pregnancy or luteolysis. Luteolysis means that's the breakdowns of the corpus luteum, okay, or degeneration. So the main hormone associated with this stage will be progesterone, significantly higher during the luteal phase compared to the other phase. So during the luteal phase, the FSH-LH cause the remaining part of the dominant follicle to transform into the corpus luteum, and more important actually is LH role, okay? And it continued to grow for some time after ovulation and produce high concentration of progesterone, and to a lesser extent estrogen, low concentration estrogen. So progesterone is very important, work together with the estrogen, maintain the lining interest, and prepare for any implantation. And the release of the progesterone also raises the woman basal body temperature, as I say that. Okay, the high concentration of progesterone also suppresses or inhibits the release of FSH. Therefore, no new follicle will develop. So the suppression or release of FSH and LH result in the degeneration of the corpus luteum into the corpus albicans, so which are mass of fiber scar tissues. So the decrease in the concentration of progesterone causes shading of the lining, leading to the menstruation. So the degeneration of corpus luteum can be delayed when the implantation takes place because the human embryo produces another hormone called HCG. So that's why for the urine pregnancy test kit, okay, we detect what? We detect the HCG. Are you clear? Because production of HCG means that we already have humans embryo already, okay, by roughly about 9 days after the fertilization. And the HCG, these hormones, stimulates the corpus luteum to continue, thereby and continue to maintain the thickness of the endometrium and providing an area rich of blood vessels where the embryo can develop or implant. So eventually placenta will take over the progesterone productions and corpus luteum degenerates without the loss of the embryo or the fetus. Okay, so it depends on the pregnancy take place or not. If no pregnancy, therefore you can see that's the progesterone level decreased and therefore the menstruations take place. So this table summarizes the role of hormone in the menstrual cycle and where are the target organs secreted by who. Okay, so Gnrh secreted by hypothalamus. The target organs will be anterior pituitary glands. What is the role? Stimulate the release of the FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary glands. FSH secreted by the anterior pituitary glands. Target organ is the ovary. So what is the role in the menstrual cycle? So stimulate developments of the follicle. Okay. So I miss out another hormones, LH. Later I put the LH here. So because of FSH, so ovarians, the follicle and the ovarians here develop. So follicle actually release the estrogen. So estrogen have negative feedback at the pituitary glands. When there is low concentration, inhibits the FSH secretions, but high concentration stimulate the LH to release. Okay, and also the estrogen act on the uterine lining, so stimulate a thickening of the endometrium and also developments of the blood vessel. Okay, so give me a bit of time. So the next one will be, sorry. So LH, okay. Oops. Write down, guys. I miss out this. Okay, LH. So LH secreted by the anterior pituitary glands again. So the targets will be the ovary. Okay, organs ovary, but what kind of thing? I mean, tissues in this case will be the Graafians or ovarian follicle. Okay, so stimulate the ovarian follicle to do what? So first thing, ovulation. Second thing is to stimulate the corpus, the remaining. Okay, stimulate the remaining follicle or rupture follicle to become the corpus luteum. And also stimulates the corpus luteum to form, again, to release the progesterone. Okay. These are the parts that I miss out. And then the progesterone released by the corpus luteum, okay, target organs, okay, pituitary glands, or more precisely, guys, write down anterior. Okay, the front lobes, okay, anterior lobes of the pituitary glands. So inhibits what? The release of FSH and LH because there is possible pregnancy, and also work together estrogens onto the uterus lining, so maintain the thickness. Be careful, progesterone cannot repair. Progesterone only can maintains the lining of the endometriums. Okay, so with this I've done